Hi, my name is Nairi. I'm running an adoption support channel. Today we're going to talk about adoption depression. We're going to look at three parts of it. We're going to look at what causes depression anyway, and what might make that more difficult, more challenging when you adopt, and then what perhaps we can do about it. So if you've not found me before, please subscribe and you'll find a channel full of support for adopters. So the first thing I want to say is what can cause depression is being just generally run down physically, not having enough sleep, not having enough rest, not having enough leisure time, decent food, that type of thing. So just physically looking after yourself. Another thing that can cause depression is if relationships are neglected. So emotionally you're not getting that attachment to another person, your significant other, your family members, whoever you rely upon. If you're not having that kind of closeness with them. Another thing, number 3, is feeling that others are better than yourself. So constantly looking at what others are doing around you and just feeling undervalued and not having that self-worth. Anything traumatic that's happened in your life. So if something suddenly happens out of the blue that's very traumatic, like someone has an accident, there's a sudden bereavement, or just something that kind of hits you as a curveball within the family out of the blue. If somebody that you're close to suddenly says something very cruel and unexpected to you, so something that you weren't thinking they thought of you and just suddenly runs you down really badly, that could be another thing. So you suddenly get very ill, or you have a diagnosis of something you weren't expecting, and that causes you to not be able to do what you normally did during the day and achieve what you normally achieved. Financial pressure, loss of a job, loss of hours, change of circumstance, feeling overwhelmed. So there's just too much going on in your life, too much happening, too many people demanding of you. I guess that this is a common one. Just all of a sudden everybody seems to need you and need a little piece of you. A controlling or manipulative family member or person in your relationship that you can't actually live your life in a way that you want to, and you're finding that really difficult. So those are 9 things that can cause depression anyway. Now let's look at how that could be made more difficult, or those aspects there that can then happen when you adopt. So the first thing I think that can happen is when the child arrives, it's very physically demanding. So when the child arrives, you may have trouble getting enough sleep, being able to cook decent meals for yourself, getting any leisure time. And so because of that, because there seems to be no time for yourself, that could be the first thing that brings you down when you're adopting and causes you to begin to get depressed. The second thing, which also obviously I've mentioned a lot of these things here, is you don't get enough time for your significant other or your family member that's your supporter. So whoever's the person that's the main supporter in your life, because there's a child now that needs your attention and needs all of your time, or seemingly needs all of your time, then you don't have that support from that person that you really love, and you feel that you're drifting further away from them, and this can cause arguments, of course, and that can bring depression on. Another thing that is really common, I think, is you think that all other adopters are coping. You see what they're doing, you see what they're saying, and you think that adopters are coping. Family members seem to suggest other ways of dealing with things, and friends seem to suggest other ways of dealing with things, and you know that that's not working, and so you feel just generally that as an adopter that you're failing and that you can't do what you need to do for the child. And that would be a big one, I think, that people would find hits them quite hard. And then the next one are the unexpected emotions that come from dealing with a child that has gone through trauma and all the history that they've gone through. And so to start with, you might feel like you're coping with it, but when you see how that plays out in their everyday behaviour, some of the things they say and do, and things that play on your mind from their history, then that trauma that they're experiencing kind of rubs off onto you. It's called compassion fatigue, or compassion burnout, secondary traumas, different names for it, but then you become part of what they're experiencing. Just hard criticism from people outside of your immediate network, so social workers, family members, friends, just not agreeing with what you're doing and how you're doing it, and actually outwardly saying that and hurting your feelings, and then you feel like devalued, and you feel like you're making the wrong decisions for the children, but you don't know what those decisions should be. There seems to be no way of finding out what that's going to be. And just financial pressure from having another child in the home, having a child in the home, and not being able to go out to work immediately, having to reduce hours, having to buy stuff for the child, just not being able to make ends meet. finding the behaviours from the child are a lot more than you anticipated, a lot more than you were told, and just not being able to cope with that, not being surprised and thinking that there's no way out of it, as the behaviour is challenging every day and they're bringing stuff to you every day that you need to deal with, and you don't feel strong enough to do that. Just generally feeling isolated, all of these things compounded, and other things that generally happen with depression, suddenly feeling that you're becoming depressed, and that in itself isolating you, and therefore depression really takes hold of you in a way that it wouldn't if you had somebody to talk to about things early on. And sometimes just being a parent in general, whether you're an adopter or not, when you have things that you're struggling with, you don't necessarily feel that you want to share it, and it may be that you're looking around you and there isn't anybody to share with, and so that isolation just compounds everything else that you're going through and really brings depression on. So those are the kind of like cumulative factors of just general depression and depression that can happen through adoption. Things that you can put into place that can help you either prevent you from getting to that more critical point, or if you're getting to that critical point, you can think about what you want to do about it. So the first thing to say is you have to recognize that you have it. You've got to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it is the first step to being able to recover from it. Even if you're very early in the stage and you think you're not fully depressed yet, but you're going down that route, acknowledging it early is going to save you a lot of heartache. The way that you're going to know if you've got depression is you might be feeling very down, very sad, cry very easily, or you might be very anxious and agitated. It's a different kind of type of depression, but it's still anxiety and depression. It's not the same, but it means that you're not well. You might not be able to sleep, or you might want to sleep all the time. You might feel exhausted. You just might feel physically unwell, a little bit like flu symptoms where you're aching all the time and everything feels like an effort for your body. You might be having panic attacks, you might be getting dizzy, you just might feel just rubbish and feel like you don't want to do anything, you don't want to get involved in your daily routines, you don't want to get involved with people, you can't see the positive in the adoption, you can't see positives in people. So all of those things could be a sign that you have depression. There might not be, and if they don't last very long, there might not be, and there might be other things that you have. Acknowledging it to yourself and acknowledging it to other people is two different things, because when you acknowledge it out loud and you say it, then it really does become real. So the next thing would be to acknowledge it to your nearest and dearest. You may be a single adopter, so that might be somebody in the family, it might be a friend, or you might have a partner, and acknowledging it so that they can be on that journey is definitely going to be really important. Now, some people are not very good at acknowledging depression, so you may have a family member or partner who doesn't want to hear it, and that's not them being unloving and unkind, it's them kind of not wanting to accept that you're not very well, or they might be more of a kind of gung-ho person who is never the type to kind of get depressed, but that's irrelevant to you. The most important thing is that you tell them that you think you're suffering from depression, adoption blues, or anxiety, whatever you want to say, and they can go on the journey with you and they can support you if you need help to make decisions, because sometimes when you're depressed or anxious you can't make decisions, so they can be that support and that sort of like catch-all for you. The next thing to do is try to address the imbalances that have already happened. So if you're not getting enough sleep, you are the person staying at home with the child, you're the person getting up for the child, you need to try and get enough sleep or rest, whether that's day or night. You have to get sleep. Sleep is one of the big breaking factors in any depression, anxiety situation, because when you don't get enough sleep you cannot think clearly. And also readjust the balance in leisure or time away from the child. So you need to find time away where you just do other things. It might be that you need an actual holiday break, or it just might mean that you need time on your own and some leisure time. So address those balances, make sure you eat well, make sure you're getting enough energy into your body. So obviously if things are not improving and you've done all those things, I guess the next thing is to look at why you think you are getting depressed. So all of the things that I've given you here. So if it's just the whole kind of shock of having an adoptive child in and all of the things that might have come with that, then I guess there's going to be ways of moving forward and getting around that. If of course it is around the behaviour of the child and struggling with some of the things that they're bringing to the table, then you're going to need a different type of support than just support for yourself. So let's look at support for yourself. So support for yourself might well be that you need to seek out therapy and help for yourself, for your own mood. A lot of people struggle with that. I'm one of them. I would rather not talk to a stranger about my situation, but I know it helps a lot of people, so that's got to be one route that you can go down. If you don't feel that you can do that off your own back, then you would go to your GP and say how you're feeling, describe your symptoms, and they can be the ones to kind of decide how far down the depression pathway you've already got, and how early it is, and whether they need to do something more immediately around medication or they don't. But part of this has to be as well that if it's around the child and the behaviours that you're struggling with, obviously check out my channel. I've got so much on there that might make you feel less isolated, because we've been through a lot with our boys behaviour wise. But if it's the shock of having a child that's bringing a lot of difficulties, then you need to try and seek out therapy or help for the child, or somebody who's going to understand those behaviours to work with you, with a child, to take that pressure off of you that you're the one who has to make everything happen and go well. And I would really suggest in the mix that if there's somebody in the family that's willing to have the child regularly for you, just a few hours a week, that's just going to take the pressure off you immensely, and we've had to do that ourselves. So my mum just has the boys just for a few hours a week, but those few hours a week are gold dust. Even though they're at school, they are gold dust to us, and we really value that. So seek out if there's someone who's able to do that for you. The next stage, of course, is you being willing to accept help, whether it be for the child or for you. And yeah, that's another thing I struggle with. Being able to accept help from a therapist for you or the child, or from the GP. If the GP says, I'm really worried about you, I want you to go to therapy, you need to do that first, and then I'll think about medication, then really you need to do that. If the GP says, I need to get your medication today, then you need to do that. And I know, like, it was probably about 12 years ago I refused medication once. It wasn't when we were adopting, but I went back 6 months after, and I was way worse than I was the first time, and I should have just listened. But it's hard to accept help. I think if you're independent, you feel like you're going to pull yourself out of it, and you might well do. You don't want to accept that somebody else thinks that you're not going to. So if it's around the child, I think it was said by another adopter when I did a previous video, being able to acknowledge that parenting is hard, it's difficult, there's sad times, there's times when you haven't done it right, you can't do it right, you can't meet all the child's needs all of the time, you're not going to be the perfect parent, you're not going to be the perfect adopter, and these are the things that you've struggled with that you didn't expect you were going to struggle with. Being able to talk that out, whether it be with a therapist or a close friend, is so important, because sometimes adopters do not appreciate the intricacies of adoption, particularly if you're not adopting a baby, but sometimes even if you have adopted a baby, there are so many parts to adoption that we don't understand until we adopt, and so being able to talk things out is obviously going to be critical. I hope this video helps you. I hope to make a few more videos on depression and different aspects of it to help you, because I do think that it's very real, and I think many adopters and foster carers suffer from it. And so I hope it's helped you, and if it has, please subscribe, check out my channel. There are over 200 videos on there, all around different subjects around adoption, and I look forward to seeing you on my channel. Thank you.